And also because, you know, we have studied too many things, right? I mean, since after the midterm, we covered the Middle English period, early modern English period, and American English, and a lot of stuff, right? So if I ask you to memorize all those things, I think you'll die, right? It's impossible, right, to memorize every detailed point. So I think take home would be a good approach, because in a class like this, people also do take home exams for this kind of class. Okay? So last week, so let's go over what we went over last week. So last week we went over American English, right? So here. So last week we went over American English, you guys remember? And we went over different periods, right? Different periods of American English development. So the history of American English development into 3 periods, right? 3 big periods. Even though you can also classify the periods into smaller units, we go with 3 big periods: colonial period, continental expansion, moving to the west, and then international period, right, which is the last period up until the present time, right? So the colonial period is when you have an influx of British people and some European people, right? And then the continental expansion is when you move westward, right, to other areas in the US as a result of the mindset that's called manifest destiny, right, remember? And we have influx of other European settlers, right, into this period. And the international period, we have seen also influx of immigrants from all over the world, right? And you come into contact with many, many languages. So that's the history. And we also went over the concept of dialect and the concept of language, right? What's different between a dialect and a language? Mutual intelligibility, right? So mutual intelligibility, right? In other words, if people who interact with each other, right, if they can mutually understand each other, right? In other words, if there's mutual intelligibility, then we say that they speak 2 dialects of the same language, right? If their speech is different, right? We say that as long as they can understand each other, we say that they speak 2 dialects of the same language, right? However, for language here, there's no mutual intelligibility, right? For example, Chinese people who speak different kinds of Chinese, they cannot understand each other. So we say that they speak different languages, right? Even though people might understand those things as the same language and they call it Chinese, right? In fact, from a linguistic point of view, they are different languages, right? Hong Kong Chinese and Mandarin Chinese, they are 2 different languages from a linguistic point of view, right? Not from a political point of view. Politically, yeah, they are the same language because they are under the same government like that, right? And there are many kinds of dialects, right? A neutral term for dialect is, we call it variety, right? Language variety, right? Accent is different. Accent is only for pronunciation. Remember that? Accent is only for pronunciation, but variety is a neutral term, a linguistic term for dialect, right? Because people usually use the term dialect in a negative sense, right? To say that this person doesn't speak the standard language, right? But we know that the standard language is also a dialect, right? So everyone speaks a dialect, right? From a linguistic point of view, not from a not from a lay people point of view. Okay, so there are many kinds of dialects, like regional dialects, so it depends on where you are from, and social dialects, it depends on what social group you are from, right? So let's see, pick up where we left off last time. Where are we? So this is where we left off, right, last time. So many kinds of dialects, right? Dialectal variations depending on your region, where you are from, where you spend most of your life at, right? Social class, what social class you are from, ethnicity, what kind of ethnic background you have, right? Asian, Asian American, African American, Hispanic American, and so on. Style, informal or formal or half formal, like that. Age, what kind of age group, what generation you are from. Sex and gender, men speak differently from women, right? So we will study region and social class and ethnicity in this class, okay? To start with regional dialects of American English, regional varieties usually are described in terms of lexical choices, right? And the dialectologists, people who study dialects based on region, they usually plot different kinds of graph, different kinds of map to describe regional differences. So dialectologists, people who study dialects, right, look at norms, right, non-mobile or rural men in particular. Why? Because they want to get authentic data, right? So men, they speak differently from women, right? And they usually use the old form so women are known to, create words and to speak in a very fashionable manner. So they focus on men because men are more stable, right? And then rural. So people who live in the rural area, they are not exposed to urbanization, they are not exposed to technological advancement of any sort, or to a lesser degree. So if you pick rural men, it would be kind of an advantage to get authentic data like that. And non-mobile, people who haven't moved, who haven't gone to any university, who haven't received education like that. So that's why we use the norm, right? Non-mobile or rural men, because we believe that they give us authentic data. Their speech has not been influenced by anything, by education, by contact with other languages, and so on. So what they speak is authentic data for regional dialects, right? They have lived there for a long time, so they are familiar with the area and so on. And dialectologists go around asking what the word you use for, let's say, soda, for Coca-Cola, for soft drink, for anything, right? For anything. So, and they plotted variation on a map and they drew lines, and those lines we call them isoglosses, right? I'll show you isoglosses. And one influential study was done by Carver in 1987, and he came up with what we call Dictionary of American Regional English, right? And but nowadays, modern day sociolinguists, they look at urban populations and examine different regions in terms of what's happening in the cities with respect to language change. So this is kind of in contrast to the old way of doing research, right? Because nowadays we look at urban, right? Or big cities like New York, Chicago, or Boston to see what effects like urbanization or immigration may have caused to the language, right? Because in those cities, you have a lot of immigrants, right? And people come and live together, so language would change in some way. So in modern days, sociolinguists look at urban population rather than old or rural people and so on. And famous linguists include LaBeouf, Ash, and Boberg, and so on, right? Now, you see isoglosses. Remember, isoglosses are different lines that sociolinguists draw, right? Different lines. And one isogloss refers to the line that represents the boundary between areas with differences in the speech, okay? So if this area, you see this pink line here, so if this area is different, so they go around asking people, right? They go around asking people in all the area, and they see that this is kind of the boundary, right? So they draw a line. We call this the isogloss, right? So people in that area speak differently in one aspect from the rest of the people. So people in this area, this is kind of green, bluish green, right? So people in this area, Northern City, they speak differently from the inland north, like this. And then you see a big, what is that, red area here, south, right? So people in this area speak differently from this, the next area, like that. So that's one isogloss for one linguistic item. So you can draw two isoglosses for two linguistic items or for two grammatical constructions that are different, like that. And some dialectal features that sociolinguists identify, phonological differences. For example, pin and pen. Some people merge pin and pen together. So pin and pen sound alike. So can I have a pen? Like that. So we don't know whether it's a pin or a pen, right? Mary, Mary, Mary. Some people pronounce them alike, but in fact they are different, right? So Mary, 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 Mary. Which or which? I think I should write this out. Where's my mouse here? So Mary, Mary, Mary. So this is right? To marry someone, like that. And this is to be happy, Merry, Merry Christmas, like that. And then Mary, a person's name, right? Mary, 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 like that. But it doesn't matter because in a context, you know whether you marry someone or it's the person's name or whether you are happy, right? In context, you know. So some people pronounce them all alike, right? And pin and pen also. Pin is short E, right? And pen is this kind of vowel, right? Pin and pen. But people pronounce them alike. But in context, you know, people don't speak in minimal pairs, right? So in context, you will understand. But some people merge them all together so that every word sounds alike. Or which and which. Some people pronounce it like which, like this, you guys, with the HW. And some people just which, right? HW and just W. Which and which, right? Harvard Yard, we talk about that, right? Especially in New England and New Yorkers, they drop the R after a vowel. Remember, post-vocalic R. So the R in all of these positions, Harvard Yard, is R-less in those areas. Cod and cod, people merge them, right? So cod, let's say cod, C-A-U-G-H-T, that's all, and cod, that's ah, like that, cod and cod. A lot of people merge them, so the two sound alike, right? Okay, that's only sound, right? Accent. Now, lexical differences, pail and bucket. Some people don't know what a bucket is because they call it a pail, like that, some areas. Blinds, shades, or curtains. Some people call this kind of thing blind, right? And then the shades or curtains, they have preference. Soda or pop, that's your soft drink. And parkway, freeway, expressway, highway. Some people prefer, or the only term that they know is expressway in some areas of the US, like that. Faucet, tap, or spigot. So when you go to the bathroom and you drink tap water, like that, so that's what some people call faucet, right, or spigot. And grammatical differences also. The house needs painted or painting, right? In standard English, it would be painting, right? Or he doesn't know, they did it, they have done it. But some people say the house need painted. He don't know, they done it, they done it, right? So what I'm saying here is dialects could be different in terms of phonology, in terms of morphology, in terms of grammar, like that. Now people go around asking questions, what do you call this thing? You call it a pail or a bucket, you call it blinds or shades or curtains, like that, right? Or how do you say this? The house needs painted or the house needs painting, like that, right? So people go around, so one item is one isogloss, one item is one isogloss, one item is one isogloss, right? So you collect a lot of data and you come up with this type of thing, right? So you have the notational markers here, like blue is soda, kind of violet here is tonic, green here is pop. So what do you call Coca-Cola? May I have one Coca-Cola? May I have soft drink? May I have a pop? May I have a Coke? How do you call that, right? So when you go around asking people, this is the result of that one linguistic item. So the green area here, which is like the majority of American people, perhaps you see the green isogloss here. So the green would call it the pop, right? So pop instead of Coca-Cola, instead of soft drink, instead of tonic, like that. And then the blue here, soda. Let's have soda, like that. So in California, Colorado, some part of Arizona, like that. And then the red area here, south, right? They call it Coke or soft drink, like that, right? So this is just one linguistic item, right? And then another linguistic item, right? So that's one linguistic item. So you have this type of map, right? Dialect mapped based on one item only. So you have the southern area here, and then there's the deep south area there, Texas, right? And then California here, right? Now, this is another item. This is another dialect map, right? Positive anymore. When you use anymore, usually you use it in a negative sentence, right? You don't do this anymore, right? Or in a question, do you love me anymore? Like that. However, some people use anymore in a positive sentence, which is the dialectal variation. It's hard to find a good job anymore, like that, right? So this is a picture of anymore. Oops, sorry, wrong. I may have inserted a wrong picture. This is for the soda. So I'll bring you the right map next time. Let's skip that. So this is another item, need plus ed verb, right? In standard English, we say my car needs washing, my cars need to be washed. But here, some dialects say, a lot of dialects would say my car needs washed, right? So in this area especially, right, in the southern area especially, they say it this way, right? And if you are interested in more of dialectal variation, you can see many other maps on this website. And then I'll bring the sound files maybe next week when we do the review, because this computer cannot handle many tasks at the same time because they are doing the recording. And if we play the sound files here, the computer will work very slowly. So I'll bring it back next time. Okay. Now we are done with regional dialects, right? Now social class. So this is social dialects, right? Based on the social class, socioeconomic class that you are in or that you belong to. So this is a classic study by William Labov, who is the father of modern sociolinguistics, right? So he studied language change and dialects in New York City, right? New York is an R-less area. Remember, New York, just like New England, is an R-less area. So people don't pronounce the R after a vowel, like fourth and then floor. They don't pronounce it. However, there are some people who want to be very fashionable, right? So they pronounce the R because elsewhere in the country, elsewhere in the US, R is fashionable. So they want to do something different, right? So they want to do something different by pronouncing the R, right? So LaBeouf go around, he goes around in New York City, and he focuses on 3 department stores. I should write this out because it's a classic study that you should know. So he went around looking at 3 department stores. One is the middle class, mid-rank store. You know, middle class, like there's this department store in the US, Macy's, right? Macy's is like middle class. Maybe in Korea, this is equal to Lotte, middle class, Korean Lotte, right? And low-ranked store, he went to S. Klein in New York City, but now it's out of business. So maybe if I were to compare that to Korean, your Korean experience, difficult. How about E-Mart or Walmart? E-Mart or Walmart in the US, okay? Which is also operating now, Walmart. So low ranked. And then high rank store, he went to Saks Fifth Avenue in New York, and Saks is maybe nowadays in every city, but they sell items like Gucci, Louis Vuitton, and that kind of stuff. So Saks may be equal to Avenue. I don't know how you would read that in French. Avenuel in Myeongdong or in the new Lotte Tower, right? So 3 kinds of store here, or some branch of Hyundai Baekhwajam or some branch of Lotte Baekhwajam, like that, right? So 3 high-ranked store. So he went to 3 different kinds of stores, right? And he examined the use of R in the word 4th floor, right? So he would go around asking people so that he gets the answer of 4th floor. So what shoes? What floor? For example, where can I find women's shoes, like that? Because he know that he would expect the answer to be 4th floor, like that. And he record how many R's people pronounce, right? So he found that the high-ranked store, the salespeople especially, the salespeople pronounce most R, right? Most R in comparison to mid-rank and low-ranked. So in other words, R goes up this way, right? So less R. So this salespeople didn't do well in low-ranked stores, right? Meaning that they don't pronounce R most of the time. They may pronounce some R, right? But not all. But high-ranked store, salespeople pronounce most R, right? Many R's, in other words. So this is what we would expect, right? That if you go up, if you go up the social class, then you have more R's, right? And notice that he tested this on salespeople, not the customers. The reason is because he wants to show that salespeople also change their behavior according to the customers that they talk to, right? So salespeople change their behavior because they interact with upscale people, and they change their speech patterns to match the speech patterns of whoever they talk to, right? And he also, this is the details of the study, just for if you are interested. And the salespeople, he also looked at different types of salespeople, like the stock people, people who work in the back, you know, they don't interact with customers, right? They just do the inventory stuff, right, in the back. So they don't interact, they don't see the customers. And he looked at like customer service people, and so on. So he found that even in high-rank stores, like Saks, stock people pronounce less R than customer service people, right? So this confirms his hypothesis, right? This confirms his hypothesis that you change your speech to accommodate or to match the speech of whoever you talk to, right? So this is what we call social dialect. Because R is like a fashionable item, just like a fashionable handbag, just like a fashionable type of dress or type of suit or the kind of car that you drive. The use of language can tell you what kind of social class you want to be perceived as coming from. Right? So it's not that, what is important here is that it's not that salespeople are high-class people or low-class people in themselves, but they, in terms of speaking, right, they change their behavior to match the behavior of those people they talk to. So you see the graph here, right? Saks is highest in terms of R, percentage of R, and Macy's, which is a mid-rank store, is here, and Klein or S. Klein did not do well on that. Right? And then this is the more detailed study that compares like New York City and Reading, England, and so on. Okay? So I think you only have to know the important stuff here, the most important stuff. Okay? The last thing that we'll look at is dialects in terms of ethnicity. So what ethnic group you are from or you belong to: Chicano English, African American English, Native American English. So this doesn't mean that, okay, this is important. This doesn't mean that if you are African American, okay, if you are African American, you have to speak African American English. It doesn't mean that, because it also depends on your education level. It depends on who you hang out with, right? If I'm Asian American and if I hang out with African American from birth, right? So chances are that I would speak African American even though I'm not African American myself, like that. But most of the time, if you hang out with people from the same ethnic group, and people of the same ethnic group tend to hang out together, right? So they would have the kind of dialects that would relate or would correspond to their ethnicity. And one case in particular is AAVE, African American Vernacular English, or Black English in some people's term. African American English shares features with other English dialects, but there are some differences. For example, they tend to delete, copula verb, right? Verb to be. They tend to delete copula verb. So the coffee cold today instead of the coffee is cold today, like that. That's a one-time event, right? However, if it's a habitual event, meaning that it's always like that, they don't delete it, but they use the be form. The coffee be cold here, like that. Right? So if you say Krista is handsome, right? Krista is handsome. In this dialect, you say Krista be handsome because it's habitual. Right? Always, not one time, like that. Okay? And there are some phonological features of African American Vernacular English, like they tend to delete, for example, they tend to delete the final consonant, test to test, desk to desk, like that. Deletion of post-vocalic liquids, help. So the L here is liquid, right? So instead of help, so we have help instead, ball to ball, car to car, like that. And there are other features like the man, TH, the cross D to just D, the man, like that. So you don't have to memorize this, but just know that they are different, right? And also morphosyntactic features, absence of possessive S, John's hat to John hat, absence of third person singular present tense, she talk, he sing, and so on. The important point here is that the most important point here is that it's not that they are stupid, it's not that they are uneducated, right? But they are just different, and the differences are systematic, in the sense of if they don't put the S at the end, they don't do it across the board, no matter in what situation, right? It's not like they do it one time and then next time they just think of doing it and then they put the S. It's not like that, but this is systematic, right? Systematic. It's not random, in other words, right? And it's not because they don't have education, it's just because they are different. As you saw in early modern English, right? Third person present tense, sometimes it's TH, sometimes it's S, sometimes it's something else, right? So think of African American English that way, right? Rather than thinking of them as stupid people, uneducated people, but just because they are different, right? Okay, so that's it for American English. Right? Now we move on to the last unit of our class here, which is Word Englishes. Now, American English came into being around the 16th and 17th century, right? As a result of colonization. Now, we look at, the next thing we look at would be word Englishes, how English spread throughout the world, right? So we talked about American English, right, which is one version of English that spread, right, out of England. Now, we look at other contexts of English spread over the world. Now, there are two spread of English. First, we'll talk about the spread of English, right, from England, right, from England. There are two diasporas, right? There are two diasporas. There are two periods, in other words, or there are two dispersals, right? One, we call it first diaspora, right? First diaspora. This is when English is transported into the New World with migrations of substantial numbers of English speakers. American English is included in this period, right? So the first diaspora or the first dispersal. So American English is part of this. So what is notable, what you should know about this period is that there is the influx of people who speak English, right, into those areas, right? US and Canada, right? So this is the history, US and Canada, early 17th century to New England, Virginia. We talked about that, right? To Ireland and so on, to the US from different parts of England. From the 17th century, we have African slaves to South American states, right? We talked about that, and Caribbean islands, right? And then later on, we have some British settlers to Canada, right? So US and Canada are included in this first period of spread. And Australia from 1770, New Zealand from 1790s, and so on. So again, what's notable here is the transportation of English-speaking people, right, to those areas. So this period places English in different continents, right? In the American continent, in Australia, right, and in New Zealand. Right? But it didn't give English a significant numerical superiority with respect to major languages of the world. In other words, what I'm saying here is that even though you have the transportation of English-speaking people, right? But the number of the areas here is very low. USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, only 4, right? So in this period, English was not a major language yet, right? English was not a major language in comparison to French, in comparison to Spanish, in comparison to Arabic, for example. Right? But it plants the language into different continents. Right? That's the first period. Now the second period, the second diaspora, is when you transport English to colonial areas, right? Colonial areas of England, but not transportation of English-speaking people, right? So this means that people who went to those areas like India, South Africa, and many areas in Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, the Philippines, and so on, right? Or many areas in Africa. People who went there are people who are important to carry out some administrative, some legal functions, right? So like governors or judges or the juries and so on, right? So not like the first period where you have English-speaking people in a large number. But here you only have people who had to carry out some governmental duties, some governmental responsibilities, right? Transported to South Asia like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and so on, right? It is in this period that English became one of the major international languages, right? And notice that in these areas, there are local languages already, right? India, for example, how many local languages are there? Hundreds, right? Or Malaysia, Chinese, or Malay, Hong Kong, also Chinese, and so on, right? Philippines, in the Philippines, you have Tagalog, for example, right? So English kind of competes with the local languages in this area, right? And English is like an elite language in this area, right? So only people who have education, only people who have high status to deal with governmental officers from the colonizer would be able to speak English like that. So it's interesting that English has become like a fashionable or an elite language that can indicate your status in these areas. It's never like that in the US, right? Because everybody speaks English. So the fact that you can speak English doesn't make you different from other people like that. But in these areas, in the second diaspora, the fact that you can speak English puts you in an advantage, right? Against other people, over other people. Right? So 3 types of English colonies. First type is substantial settlement by first language speakers of English displays the pre-colonial population, right? This is the first diaspora, right? USA and Australia. And the second type is the second diaspora, right? Sparser colonial settlements maintain the pre-colonial population and so on, like in Africa, in Asia, and so on. Third type, a pre-colonial population was replaced by new labor from elsewhere in West Africa, the Caribbean, and so on, right? So this is where you would have a lot of variation, which I will talk about in a minute. Lingua franca, so I need to explain the terms. Lingua franca, you guys know that concept, lingua franca. So lingua franca is a language that's used between 2 interlocutors, 2 people who talk to each other. But it's not the first language of either of the interlocutors, right? So if you speak Korean and another person you talk to speaks Chinese, then you use English as a lingua franca, right? English is not a native tongue of either of the people there, right? And many languages throughout the history serve as lingua franca, like Chinese, French, Arabic, Turkish, and English, right? And a lingua franca may develop into a pidgin and a Creole. So I need to now define pidgin and Creole. A pidgin is a language with no native speakers, right? It's no one's first language, but it is a contact language. So in other words, let's imagine a situation where a person, a Chinese person speaks with a Korean person, right? They both speak different languages. So they have to come up with a version that would allow them to communicate, right? So that version might be broken English because there are no experts of English, either of them, right? So one version would be, we call broken English would be a pidgin, right? Because they just develop it just in an immediate context, right? So that's a pidgin. However, when a pidgin becomes the first language of a new generation, so after time passes and after many people adopt that pidgin that arises out of contact, right? When it becomes a real language that a different generation, a younger generation of speakers adopt, then we call that a Creole, right? Okay? So a Creole is a pidgin that becomes a real language of the later generation. This is especially important in the third type of colonies, right? When you have in the Caribbean island of Barbados and Jamaica, for example, slaves from Africa could not speak English at that time, so they have to come up with some kind of pidgin, simplified English in order to communicate with their master, right? And so later generations of slaves will adopt that, and then the pidgin becomes a Creole at that point. English may have been a pidgin and a Creole at one time, remember? When the Germanic peoples came to settle down in England, and perhaps if the Germanic peoples could not communicate with each other, then they have to develop some kind of pidgin or Creole, right? So at that time, English might have been a pidgin and then became a Creole, right? In later generations. And these are examples that you don't have to memorize, right? So this is from Hawaiian pidgin, spoken by people who immigrated around the turn of the century. So inside dirt and cover and blanket finish. So it means they put the body in the ground, right? Inside dirt, so in the ground, inside dirt, in the ground, and cover it with a blanket, cover and blanket, and finish meaning that's done, that's all, like that. So you see that it's kind of broken English because they know mostly major words like inside, dirt instead of ground. Maybe they don't know the word ground, right? So, and they don't have things like preposition. They don't have things like tense or elaborate system of preposition, so they have to use and, cover and blanket like that. And then later on, when Hawaiian pidgin became a Creole, you have this kind of situation. The first Japanese run away from Japan come. So this is more elaborated than the first case where you just have major words stuck together, right? Here you have even the word the, which is da here. And you have things like ran away from, you have prepositions, right? More elaborate prepositions than just pidgin, right? So when it becomes a Creole, it's like a fully functional language, right? Okay, now users of English. These are terms that you should be familiar with, right? Even before this class. So those who speak English respectively, you can call them first ENL, English as a native language, right? Language of those born and raised in one of the countries where English is historically the first language to be spoken. That's the first diaspora, right? ENL, English as a native language. And then you have English as a second language, ESL, right? Language spoken in territories once colonized by English, especially the second diaspora. And then EFL, English as a foreign language, language for whom it serves no purposes within their own countries, right? And EFL was learned to be used as the language, was learned to be used with native speakers, right? So Korea would be in this in this category, right? EFL, right? So ESL would be India, Nigeria, Singapore, where they already have their local language, their home language. India, like Hindi, for example, and other languages. Singapore, you have Malay, you have Chinese, and so on, right? Hong Kong is the same. But EFL is like Thailand, EFL is like Korea, and so on. But there are problems with these three-way categorization, ENL, ESL, and EFL. What are those problems? ENL is not a single variety of English, as you know, right? As you know, because we just looked at dialects of American English, right? We have regional dialects, we have social dialects, so it's not a single variety of English. So this ENL is too broad, right? Too broad. It's not a single variety of English. And even within ENL, even within American English, what do you have? African American English that we just looked at, right? Which is totally different from standard English, right? And you have also Creole English, Hawaiian Creole, remember? So ENL is not a single variety, right? That it purports to be, that it may seem to be, right? Pidgin and Creoles do not fit into the categorization I just said, right? Hawaiian Creole, for example, or Jamaican English, and so on, right? That kind of English doesn't fit neatly into these three-way categorization. And there are a large group of ENL speakers in EFL territories and vice versa, right? So people who went and live in ESL territories and people who came from ESL territories, like Indian people who live in Britain, many Chinese people, many Hong Kong people who live in Canada, for example. How do we categorize those people? Are they ENL speakers or are they ESL speakers, like that? So problems, right? And it's based on the concept of monolingualism, but bi and multilingualism seems to be the norm, right? So in other words, even in the US, people who can speak two languages, Spanish and English, right? There are lots and lots of those people, right? So can we say that, like Hispanic American, for example, is English their first language? Is English their native language, right? Because this model doesn't fit those people in neatly, right? And it's based on the basic distinction between native speakers and non-native speakers, with the first group being considered superior regardless of the quality of their language, right? So as you can see, when people say, oh, English is your native language, so that seems to be positive, right? More positive than, oh, English is your foreign language, like that. However, that's problematic in itself, right? Because linguistic terms should not be biased against or biased in favor, right, of any group in particular. And neat classifications became increasingly difficult, right? So this is how I would elaborate on that issue, right? So this is a long passage, okay? So the essence of it, the main point of it is that in the old days, when we use the term native, right? When we use the term native only means what? Native only means people who belong to a specific region, right? Like this is an animal native to Korea. This is a plant native to Korea, right? So native originally means things like animal or people or even trees or plants that are specific to one area, that are found in one area, right? So when we say native people in the US, for example, we refer to Native American people, right? Native American people. However, when we use it with the term speaker, native speakers of English, that's totally a different sense, right? Because native speakers, the term native speaker conveys something of advanced, civilized, or educated, right? So there's a change there's a change of the metaphor used here. From a term that used to mean specific to one area to something that is very positive, that conveys your level of education, right? That conveys your authenticity in speaking, like that. And also it creates what we call inferiority complex to people, right? If people say, oh, you speak English as a second language, you speak English as the foreign language, then the learners, right, they feel that their English is not good enough, right? They feel that their language is not good enough as compared to people who were born and raised in USA, for example. Right? So there is a model, a new model, relatively new model that doesn't classify the use of English or users of English into like native or second language or foreign language to avoid those problems, that we talk about. Now this is by Kacharu, right? Kacharu, an Indian from India, an Indian American scholar, right? He said that English can be divided into three concentric circles, meaning that this is the center, right? This is the center, and this is like outer, this is also outer area. So this is the center, concentric, and then outer, and then expanding circle. So he divides English into three concentric is center, right? Centric, center circles. So with the inner circle, outer circle, and expanding circle, right? And each one has different kinds of characteristics. So the inner circle usually refers to ENL user, English as a native language user, usually refers to that, right? England and former settler colonies in the first diaspora that I mentioned, remember, right? Australia, New Zealand, Canada, like that. This is less than 500 million users. So not a lot in terms of people number. And is this a norm providing, right? Is this a norm providing model, right? With a question mark. Meaning that when you study English, right, you get the norms. You look at the dictionaries, you look at grammar books, from where? Usually from the inner circle, right? Usually from the inner circle, like Longman Dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, or grammar books, right? Usually by people in the inner circle. So is this a norm providing, right? And then as you move out from that inner circle, you have outer circle, ESL users traditionally that we looked at, right? The traditional term ESL users, former UK colonial dependencies, right? Dependencies like Hong Kong, Singapore, India, and so on. And this constitutes over 500 million users, right? A lot more than the inner circle. Is this a non-developing circle? Meaning that they are developing their norm of use independently, like Hong Kong English, Singaporean English, they have their own norms, right, of English. So they are developing the norms, right, to become like inner circle varieties. Now in the expanding circle, you might think of that circle as being equal to EFL users in the traditional term, right? And these are countries with no UK colonial past like Korea, Japan, Thailand, and so on, China. But this constitutes the highest number of users, over 1 billion users. Is it norm dependent or not? Meaning, are they dependent upon the norms by inner circle only, or are they developing their own norms? So that's the question, right? So the three terms here, right, include a lot more, right? The three terms include a lot more than just the traditional terms, EFL, ESL, or ENL, right? And It also accounts for the numbers of speaker, right, in many areas. So the inner circle, you have about this, right, which is 320, 380 million, which is this center. And then as you go outward, right, so we have 150 to 300 million in here, right, and then expanding circle 100 to 1,000 million, like that. So what group might be the most important group? Of course, it has to be expanding circle, right? Because you have a lot more number, a higher number than just the inner circle, right? Let me show you this one before we go back. Here you see this this graph shows you interactions in English, right? The estimated number of interactions in English. So this is the blue area, between non-native speakers, right, the traditional terms, because the reason why we use the traditional term here is because people kind of have the same understanding, right? Even though these terms are problematic, but people have similar understanding of those terms, so we go with the traditional terms here. Between non-native speakers, 74%, right? In other words, it's just like Korean people talk to Chinese people, Korean tourists or Korean guides talk to Chinese tourists, like that, right? Korean businessmen talk to a Chinese businessman, like that. So between non-native speaker, that's like 74%, right? Highest number. And then between native speaker and non-native speaker, like America, like James talk to you guys, or that kind of thing, right? So that's only 22%. And between native speakers themselves, like American talk to another American, that's 4%. So what type of English is most important? It has to be between non-native speakers, right? Which is the most prevalent form of English that people use, right? So a question that arises out of this is, why do we have to rely on, remember this? Why do we have to rely on the inner circle to provide us the norms of use? Why do we have to follow their norms? Why do we have to say it in their ways? Why do we have to pronounce it in the British, RP pronunciation, received pronunciation? Why do we have to pronounce it in an American way, like that, right? Because now that most interactions are between non-native speakers, what's the use of following native speaker models like that, right? It doesn't matter whether it's Australian model or a British model. What's the use of that? Because now that it's between non-native speakers, right? And there's another model where this person, Mondiano, which is another researcher, she comes up with a new model. She proposes a new model where EIL is in the middle. EIL here is English as an international language, right? English as an international language, which is like in the middle, because this is a variety that most other varieties share, right? Like American English and British English, Australian English, and other varieties, they share certain features, right? So this is what we call the EIL, English as an international language, right? This is like the intersected area of all kinds of English. So the EIL, English as an international language, will allow learners to be able to communicate with anyone, native speakers or non-native speakers, right? Because this is the variety that all other major varieties share, right? So this is what she proposes as a model for teaching English, right? So things that are important, things that will not affect comprehension will be in this area, like that. So EIL, English as an international language. We are out of time. We will come back on Wednesday to go on with standard English and how to teach English and so on.